Welcome to this lecture. In step 2 of delivering your content, your whole objective is to transform the audience's thinking that whatever you have placed as this category within your framework is important. Remember that in an earlier section of this course, you learned how to package your information. In this section, you are delivering the content. So you're transforming your audience's thinking that what you have put in your framework is important. Again, I'm going to share with you the business techniques. I'll start off with those, and then I'll transition into the public talk techniques. For public talk techniques, you are allowed to also use the business techniques. Now, we are dealing with the H in my acronym of health. And in how I've chunked this, the H, let's assume, stands for habit. Under habit, I've got the following 4 points that I'd like to share with the audience. Let's first get those points so that you know what I'm taking you through. Your 4 points are as follows. Number 1, avoid bright lights before you sleep. Point number 2, get enough sleep. Point number 3, minimize your sugar intake. Point number 4, eat fruit and vegetables. Now those are your 4 points. Your business techniques, you can use any one of 4 techniques to explain each one of those points. The first is known as an I believe statement. So you can start off by saying something like, I believe that eating fruit and vegetables is important. And that's it, the technique is done. The second technique is to share facts, figures, statistics and research that back up why you are saying something. So as an example, if I wanted to share with you the reasons why it's important for you to get enough sleep, I could say the following. According to a clinical trial conducted on the impact of sleep, they found that by having any type of sleep deprivation, it creates an insulin resistance that can disrupt your appetite, which then has an impact on your physical performance and your mental ability. See what I just did there? I shared a fact, figure, or research to back up why I'm saying that it's important to get enough sleep. That's technique number 2. Technique number 3 is something known as most people or the average person and you statements. So anytime you want to share a statement that is negative, you bulk it up in the words of most people or the average person, and anything that's positive, you use a you statement. So as an example, if I want to share the importance of minimizing your sugar content, I'd say the following. You know, most people don't actually realize how much of sugar they are taking in a course of the day. The average person does not actually know the amount of sugar that's in a can of soda. See what I did? Most people, average person for anything that's negative, even though there might be someone in the audience that's guilty of drinking a can of soda. Then you'll add in a you statement. Immediately thereafter would sound something like, but that's not you, because you are here to find out how to develop a habit to minimize your sugar intake. The 5th technique for business talks is what is known as a rhetoric question. That's where you pose a question to the audience that you then answer. So as an example, if I want to share with you the importance under habit of getting enough sleep, I would say the following. You start off by positioning your rhetoric question by asking the audience, so what more can you do to develop good habits when it comes to healthy living? Well, let me tell you, you can get enough sleep on a daily basis. So again, I've taken my content and I use the technique of a rhetoric question to illustrate my fact. And those are your 4 techniques for business talks. Just to remind you, number 1, it's I believe statements. Number 2, it's about delivering facts, figures, and research that back up why you are saying something. Number 3, it's most people or average person, you're using those words for anything that's negative, and you're using the words you statements for anything that's positive. And lastly, it's posing rhetoric questions to the audience that you then answer. Let's now move on to those additional techniques for engaging a large crowd. There are 4 in total. If you have a large crowd, you could use what is known as check-ins, just to check in on whether or not they agree with you. So I could take any one of these facts and say the following with hand gestures. Do you agree with me that minimizing sugar content is good for your health? And as you say that, you put your hands out wide and you nod your head because you want your audience to agree with you. That's the first technique. It's called a check-in. Number 2, you could pose questions to the audience that force them to respond to you. So as an example, you could raise your hand and pose a question that looks like, raise your hand if you agree with me that eating fruit and vegetables is important. Raise your hand. And so by the audience raising their hand, they give you feedback that they are in agreement with you. The third technique is what is known as compliance statements. Here you tell your audience what to do. So it sounds something like, I would like you to write this down. Avoid bright lights before you go to bed each night. So again, it's a content in my element that I would like to have shared with them. But instead of using one of my earlier techniques, I used compliance statements to get the audience to remember that particular content. And lastly, the 4th technique for large audience is just reminding them why they need to respond to you. So in case they're not nodding their heads, or in case they're not raising their hand, then just have a discussion with them to remind them why it's important that they respond to you. So you'd say something like, okay, I can see you are not raising your hands. Let me remind you again why it's important for me just to get this feedback. And once you get that agreement, you pose the question to them again to say, so let's try that technique again. And let me ask you that question again. Raise your hand if. And this time round, once you raise your hand, you should get many more hand raises in response to you. So in summary, the 4 additional techniques for transforming your audience's thinking are: number 1, use check-in statements. Number 2, ask the audience questions that they then respond to you. Give them compliance statements that force them to write the content down. And lastly, you might want to remind them why they need to respond to you. This concludes this lecture. You now have 9 techniques in total. 5 of them you can use in business talks, and an additional 4 techniques that you could use in your public engagements. I would now ask you to move on to the next lecture in this section, where I'll teach you how to illustrate this point, still staying with the H in health, which stands for habit, on how to make it easier for your audience to understand the content. I'll see you on that next lecture.